President Trump did say this is 10 on 10, so it was a very good meeting. Obviously, he is enthusiastic about the meeting. Whatever understanding they have arrived at on the conditions for a ceasefire, although even President Putin described it as a nascent, a new, not very well developed understanding, President Trump has already had discussions with the European leaders and with President Zelensky, so they're going to get them to agree. They need not put a tariff on the sale of oil that Russia is doing to China, to India, and even to the European Union.
How do you see this whole red carpets, handshakes, power play, matching of eyes? How do you see this meeting?
Well, I think it was a good meeting, going by what they have said themselves, and I think they don't want to raise any anticipation about the outcome. But President Trump did say this is 10 on 10, so it was a very good meeting. Obviously, he is enthusiastic about the meeting, and President Putin also said very significantly that an understanding has been reached. So, in my view, of course, we were all expecting that maybe ceasefire will be announced, but I think that President Putin has laid down the conditions that there is no point having a ceasefire if the root causes are not addressed. Otherwise, again, hostilities will break out. So whatever understanding they have arrived at on the conditions for a ceasefire, although even President Putin described it as a nascent, a new, not very well developed understanding, this will now be discussed by President Trump with the European leaders and with President Zelensky. And already, even in the last few hours, I think President Trump has already had discussions with the European leaders and with President Zelensky. So they're going to get them to agree. When they agree, then it will be announced. And already when President Putin was speaking, he said that the European leaders should not destroy this understanding that has come about on how to find a solution. He also said that he is very sincere about the security of Ukraine and he wants a solution to end the hostilities with Ukraine. But he said that whatever understanding has been reached should be allowed to progress and be implemented and not be destroyed by behind the scenes action by the European leaders and Zelensky. So obviously it seems that there is an understanding between President Trump and President Putin, but now this will have to be discussed with the Europeans, and I think President Trump is already doing this, and in the next few days we should have some indication about whether this will be acceptable. I think President Trump will have to put a lot of pressure on that.
President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, there was a silent dissatisfaction in between the corridor of Europe and on the Ukraine side as well. When we talk about the Vladimir Zelensky, what do you see after this meeting? Now President Trump is saying that the ball is in Europe and President Zelensky's court. So after this, how do you see?
As I said, I think it will need some pressure from President Trump to force these countries to agree, because before this, we know that on both the major conditionalities that are there with President Putin, which is that there should be no movement towards Ukraine joining NATO or any association with NATO, number one. And number two, that the territorial areas, the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine that President Putin has captured and has already included it constitutionally in Russia, that he would like to hold on to these areas, whether all four or whether one or two, that is not yet clear, but definitely the indication is that he would not return all of those areas. And President Trump himself had more or less given an indication that complete territorial return would perhaps not be possible. So now I think, again, it is for President Trump to do this, diplomacy between the European and Zelensky on one hand and President Putin on the other. But he seemed confident, and he seemed to say that the next meeting may be quite quickly, quite soon.
To the President Trump, when President Putin invited him, that the can be next meeting in Moscow. Ma'am, how do you see it from the point of view of New Delhi after the sanctions from United States, that we are on the 50% quota now? He has said that it is a meeting out of 10 on 10. He has rated it out 10 out of 10. So after this, can you see a relief for New Delhi?
Well, you know, before the summit in Anchorage, before the summit meeting between President Trump and President Putin, one of Trump's senior ministers, the U.S. Secretary for the Treasury, Mr. Besant, had even said that, oh, if the meeting doesn't go well, then we may further increase the tariffs on India. So then it was not looking good at all. But after the meeting, there are indications that, because, you know, even the journalists have been asking President Trump, what about China? They're buying so much oil from Russia. So why aren't you telling them? Why aren't you putting tariffs on them? So President Trump replied that, oh, he's going to wait for a few weeks and maybe it may not be necessary to put tariffs. So from the side of President Trump, I think it indicates that there's some kind of discussion on this, definitely with President Putin, and some kind of understanding has been reached that they need not put a tariff on the sale of oil that Russia is doing to China, to India, and even to the European Union. And there is even trade between USA and Russia, you know. So there is talk of that. In fact, President Putin spoke about it. And he said, oh yes, we have good trade with USA. So obviously, I think it does look like that this question of the additional tariff may not come about. It may be put in abeyance for a bit. And the remaining, of course, the trade team from USA is coming to India and they will have to have discussions.
A day back also on 14th of August, that is on the Independence Day of Pakistan, top Pakistani army officials, top government officials, top leaders have visited the Lashkar's top designated terrorist graveyard and paid homage to them.
Yes, I think this only proves our point. We have always been saying that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism. And it is this that has been of great concern to India. And our Prime Minister has now declared the new normal, that every act of terror will be considered an act of war. So this is a big warning to Pakistan that they should not indulge in terrorism acts by any of their own army jawans or their own, army personnel. But in addition to that, they must not support terrorism perpetrated by Lashkar-e-Taiba or Jamaat-ul-Dawa or other organizations. So I think this is a very big warning from Prime Minister Modi to the terrorists of Pakistan. So I hope they will heed that warning. But you're right, I mean, what they did on their own Independence Day on 14th August just proves the point. They have always been supporting terrorism. They have always been supporting terrorist groups, giving them money, they are now offered to build all their buildings which were destroyed by during the Operation Sindoor, whether Murid Ke Bawalpur, they'll rebuild all of that with government money. So all the money going from the IMF is going for this purpose. It is terrible. And the world should take note of that.